The port city of Odesa has become yet another tragic chapter in the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. As Russian forces unleashed what officials described as a massive ballistic missile assault on the crucial maritime facilities, the attack resulted in 7 deaths and left 15 others wounded, painting a grim picture of the continuing humanitarian toll of this protracted war. What makes this particular strike especially devastating is the nature of the targets hit trucks stationed at the port. Facilities caught fire from the impact, creating scenes of chaos and destruction that local authorities scrambled to contain. The timing of this assault carries additional weight when one considers that Odesa has been grappling with severe infrastructure challenges since mid-December. Chronic power outages have plagued the city since December 13th, a direct consequence of earlier Russian attacks that systematically targeted the region's energy infrastructure. This pattern of strikes demonstrates a calculated strategy to not only inflict immediate casualties but to degrade the city's ability to function over the long term. The port itself holds immense strategic significance, serving as a vital artery for Ukraine's economy and its ability to export grain and other essential commodities to international markets. By targeting these facilities repeatedly, Russian forces aim to strangle Ukraine's economic lifeline while simultaneously terrorizing the civilian population that depends on these critical infrastructure systems for their daily survival. The cumulative effect of these attacks extends far beyond the immediate death toll, as residents struggle to maintain normalcy amid persistent power failures and the constant threat of further bombardment. Meanwhile, in Ukraine's northern territories, a remarkable military development has unfolded that directly contradicts the narrative. Russian officials have been promoting for months. Ukrainian forces have successfully reclaimed control of nearly all of the strategically important city of Kupiansk, a victory achieved through methodical military operations that systematically isolated Russian forces occupying the urban center. This achievement stands in stark contrast to the persistent claims emanating from Moscow, where Russian military spokesmen have repeatedly declared their seizure of this key location. The recapture of Kupiansk represents more than just a tactical victory on the battlefield. It symbolizes Ukraine's continued capacity to resist Russian advances and even reverse territorial losses despite facing a larger, more heavily equipped adversary. The city's importance cannot be overstated, as it serves as a crucial logistical hub and transportation nexus in the region. Ukrainian commanders employed sophisticated tactics to cut off Russian supply lines and communication channels, effectively strangling the occupying forces before launching their counteroffensive. The success in Kupiansk demonstrates that Ukrainian forces retain the initiative in certain sectors of the front lines, capable of conducting complex operations that require coordination across multiple military domains. This development also carries significant psychological weight, as it challenges Russian propaganda claims and boosts Ukrainian morale at a critical juncture in the conflict. For the civilians who endured months of occupation, the return of Ukrainian control offers hope for reconstruction and a return to normalcy, though the scars of occupation and the destruction wrought by the fighting will take years to heal completely. The financial dimensions of Ukraine's continued resistance received a substantial boost as European Union leaders convened to announce an unprecedented support package that underscores Europe's long-term commitment to Ukrainian sovereignty. The agreement centers on a massive $105.5 billion interest-free loan designed to address both Ukraine's immediate military requirements and its broader economic needs over the next 24 months. What makes this arrangement particularly noteworthy is the mechanism through which the funds will be generated. European Union officials have decided to borrow money from international capital markets rather than tapping into the substantial reserves of frozen Russian assets held in European financial institutions. This decision reflects complex legal and political calculations, as utilizing Russian assets directly might trigger protracted legal battles and set precedents that European policymakers find concerning. The loan structure spreads the financial burden across member states while providing Ukraine with predictable, stable funding that can be allocated according to the country's evolving strategic priorities. Military expenditures will consume a significant portion of these funds, enabling Ukraine to procure advanced weapon systems, ammunition, and other essential military hardware necessary to sustain its defensive operations. However, the economic component proves equally critical, as Ukraine's civilian economy has been devastated by nearly 4 years of intensive warfare. Infrastructure reconstruction, maintaining government operations, and supporting displaced populations all require enormous financial resources that Ukraine's damaged economy cannot generate internally. The European Union's commitment for 2 full years provides Ukrainian planners with the certainty needed to develop long-term strategies rather than lurching from crisis to crisis to crisis. This financial lifeline also sends powerful signals to both Moscow and Washington to Russia. It demonstrates Europe's unwavering support despite the economic costs and energy challenges the continent has endured. While to the incoming American administration, it suggests Europe's willingness to shoulder substantial burdens in supporting Ukraine regardless of potential shifts in United States policy. Russian President Vladimir Putin seized his annual year-end address as an opportunity to place blame squarely on Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for the absence of progress toward ending the conflict, framing the Ukrainian leader's position as the primary obstacle to peace negotiations. Putin's central argument revolved around territorial concessions, asserting that Zelensky refuses to engage in discussions about ceding Ukrainian lands currently under Russian occupation as part of any potential truce agreement. This public positioning serves multiple purposes for the Russian president, both domestic and international. Within Russia, it portrays Putin as the reasonable party seeking diplomatic solutions while casting Ukraine and its Western supporters as warmongers committed to perpetuating the conflict unnecessarily. Internationally, it attempts to shift responsibility for the war's continuation onto Ukrainian shoulders, potentially fracturing the coalition of nations supporting Kyiv by suggesting that Ukrainian intransigence prevents a settlement that could spare countless lives and economic devastation. Putin's speech also addressed the contentious issue of frozen Russian assets, with the president characterizing European plans to utilize these funds for Ukrainian support as outright robbery rather than mere theft. He made this distinction deliberately, arguing that because these actions occur openly rather than covertly, they constitute brazen seizure of Russian property. Putin accompanied this accusation with a vow to pursue legal remedies through international courts that he described as independent of political influence, though critics would question whether any judicial body could realistically operate free from geopolitical considerations in such a charged environment. The Russian president promised that whatever funds were taken would eventually be returned, projecting confidence that international legal frameworks would ultimately vindicate Russia's position. This rhetoric serves to reassure Russian citizens that their nation's wealth has not been permanently lost, while simultaneously warning European nations that their actions may carry long-term legal and financial consequences that outlast the current conflict. Behind the scenes, diplomatic channels have remained active despite the public rhetoric, with American officials expressing cautious optimism about the trajectory of negotiations aimed at bringing this devastating conflict to a close. United States Secretary of State Marco Rubio provided an assessment suggesting tangible progress has been achieved, though he carefully tempered expectations by acknowledging that substantial obstacles remain unresolved and that the most difficult issues typically emerge in the final stages of any negotiation process. Rubio's comments reflected the delicate balance. American diplomats must strike encouraging continued dialogue while avoiding premature declarations of success that could collapse if negotiations found. He emphasized that neither side appears prepared to accept military defeat, making a negotiated settlement the only realistic path forward, while simultaneously stressing that ultimate decisions about peace terms rest with Ukraine and Russia rather than with Washington. This latter point addresses concerns among Ukrainian supporters that American negotiators might pressure Kyiv into accepting unfavorable terms. Concurrent with these American statements, Ukrainian Defense Minister Rustem Umerov, who traveled to the United States specifically to participate in ceasefire discussions, reported positive outcomes from his meetings with American counterparts. Umerov indicated that both sides had agreed to continue their collaborative efforts in the near future, suggesting sustained engagement rather than sporadic contact. Though he provided few specific details about the substance of these discussions, he confirmed briefing President Zelensky on the results, indicating that Ukrainian leadership remains directly engaged with the negotiation process. Perhaps most intriguingly, reports emerged that Putin's special envoy Kirill Dmitriev was preparing to travel to Miami for meetings with representatives from the incoming Trump administration, including Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. This development follows earlier conversations these Trump associates held in Berlin with Ukrainian and European officials, suggesting multiple tracks of diplomacy operating simultaneously. However, sources made clear that direct meetings between Dmitriev and Ukrainian negotiators currently in the United States had been explicitly ruled out, indicating that while both sides may be willing to engage American intermediaries, face-to-face talks between Russian and Ukrainian representatives remain beyond current diplomatic possibilities. This complex web of meetings and consultations illustrates both the seriousness with which parties are approaching potential peace discussions and the enormous challenges that remain in bridging the fundamental disagreements that have sustained this conflict for over 1,300 days.